Hey everyone. Have you ever thought about the global reach of something like a spooky story? Like a tale whispered in one corner of the world, sending chills down spines on the other side of the globe. That's kind of what we're diving into today. Not to scare anyone, though I will say I'm a bit jumpy, so no promises there. But really, we're exploring how something as specific as an episode of a horror podcast can offer a glimpse into things like global trends and, how media works these days, and maybe even a little bit about, well, ourselves. So let's unpack this. Our source material. It's an episode of a podcast called Trust Issues, which just came out recently, like on October 15th, and it's part of a bigger podcast called Scary Story Podcast, hosted by Edwin Covarrubias.
And what's really striking right off the bat is how the episode is available in, well, a ton of languages. We're talking Arabic, Chinese, Portuguese, Russian, like you name it, they've got it. It's like they decided to create a digital campfire and invite people from every corner of the world to gather round for a good scare.
Right. It's kind of wild. This one episode is like, I don't know, a mini United Nations of spooky stories.
Totally. And I think it speaks to a much larger change in how content is, created and consumed today. And it goes way beyond just translating the words. This commitment to all these different languages suggests that they understand that a horror story, like told in Arabic, might hit differently than one told in Portuguese. And it seems like they really tailored their approach to each language.
So, okay, we've got this spooky story, and it's made for this big global audience. And then it gets even more interesting when you look at how long the episode is. It's only 13 minutes. That seems kind of short, right, to really get some good suspense going?
Oh, for sure. And that actually brings to mind this whole trend of what we call snackable content. Like, think about it. These days, everyone is so busy.
Right.
Our lives are just go, go, go. And because of that, honestly, I think our attention spans are just shorter than they used to be. Like we're constantly consuming, news, entertainment, even learning stuff, and we do it all in these little tiny breaks we get in our day.
Totally. I've definitely been sucked into those 5-minute crafting videos on YouTube in between meetings. I don't even know how many times.
Right. Exactly. Like think about how popular platforms like TikTok are,
Yeah.
They're built completely around these super short pieces of content. And so this Trust Issues episode, it's kind of tapping into that same desire that people have for something that's quick and engaging, something you can consume quickly, but is doing it within, the horror genre.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's like they're offering you a little scare during your coffee break instead of making you sit down for a whole horror movie marathon.
Exactly. And honestly, it goes beyond just entertainment too, right? Like you see this need for easily digestible information everywhere you look. News snippets, those short educational videos, even like those really catchy slogans that advertisers use.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. And so this Trust Issues episode is just one example, really, of how creators are adapting to, this need for speed in how we consume things.
It's really interesting how even something like a scary story can reveal these larger trends that are going on. Something else I noticed while I was listening to the episode was that in the show notes, the host, Edwin Covarrubias, he doesn't just end the episode and leave you hanging. He goes on to include his social media info on how to, subscribe to a premium version of the podcast. And he even lists every platform you can listen on, which I thought was really interesting. It seems like it's a pretty deliberate move to get people more involved in the show. Like he's trying to build a community around it. What do you think the thinking is behind that?
Yeah, that's a really, really good observation. I think it highlights this really important thing about podcasting that maybe people don't always think about, which is that at the end of the day, it is a business.
Yeah.
And, just like any other business, you can't just offer, a great product, like in this case, a really well done, scary story. You also have to figure out how to cultivate a loyal audience. And that's where the community building comes in.
So it's not just about the story itself. It's more about making it an experience, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's where social media is huge. It's like the perfect way to actually have conversations with your listeners and, build a connection with them. So it's not just people passively pressing play and that's it. It's more like engaging with them, making them feel like they're a part of something, and even like getting feedback from your listeners to help shape what you do in the future.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then there's the whole like premium subscription thing. It seems like every podcast has one now.
Yeah, it's definitely a trend. But, from a business standpoint, it makes a lot of sense. Because if you think about it, just relying on regular advertising can be a little risky. You're kind of putting all your eggs in one basket. So, offering a premium option where people can pay to not have ads and maybe get some bonus content too, that allows creators like this guy, Edwin, to have a few different ways of making money and, lets them keep making their content. So in this case, keep those scary stories coming out.
Wow. But when you put it all together, it's really interesting to see how like the business side of all this actually works.
It is. But in the end, I think it all comes back to that like initial spark, the idea. In this case, it happens to be a spooky story, but it just shows you how something that seems really niche can actually become something much bigger. With a little creativity and an understanding of how media works these days, you really can find a global audience.
It's true. So, wow. Okay, we started with this scary story and ended up talking about all these huge trends that are like changing how we take in information, from having all these different languages to this whole snackable content thing to the way people are building a business out of it. It's pretty amazing.
Definitely. It really shows how powerful storytelling can be, especially now in a time when everything's digital. And I think it also shows that if you're a creator who's able to, adapt and change with the times, you can find your audience. It doesn't matter where they are in the world.
That's a really good point. It makes you think, if something like a short, spooky story can connect with people from all over, across different cultures and languages, then imagine what other kinds of stories, what other ideas could do if people shared them in the same way. Something to think about.